Hello, my name's Colin Doyle. I'm a senior consulting engineer with Juniper Networks, and welcome to the second video in my Apstra and EVE-NG updated series. I'm giggling a little bit because I just recorded this, only to realize towards the end that I had left it in this camera state, and I thought I was sharing what I was showing on the screen, and I totally wasn't. So, hey, it's an opportunity to do this over again and optimize the experience for you, the viewer, which is actually not even really true because I would just edit out fluff anyway. All right. If you've watched these series that I've done before, whether it was the other Apstra series or maybe some of the ones that I did about config conversions or burning MC lag to the ground, I always like to start by talking about the kind of the level set, right? Where do you need to be as a viewer with your code and the types of devices we're going to be working with and all the other little intangibles that don't really relate directly to the configurations we're doing, but are essential to being able to replicate what I'm showing you. Let's get started, huh? First off, software versions. I'll slide my notes over here. And since I'm showing you my notes, this is probably as good a time as any to talk about how I've changed how I'm going to interact with you, the viewer. Now, I have a video on this already where I talk about engagement through the Juniper Elevate community. The reason I'm steering the conversation there instead of just relying on the YouTube comments is there's a couple reasons. The big one that's relevant right now is that I can actually upload things and share them with you on the Elevate community. So the documentation that you see on the screen, the complete documentation is 272 slides long. What I've done is I've chunked that up into consumable bytes. And every video that I upload will have a thread on the Elevate community that I'll put a link to in the description of the video here. And when you go to that thread, you'll see any links or documentation that I reference. It'll include the relevant presentation, like what you see on the screen here for you to download and anything else. But this presentation, and for this video as well, EVE topology that you should be able to import into your own EVE server, save you a heck of a lot of time laying out nodes. We'll get into that in a minute. But first, let's talk about these versions. I'm using the most current version of EVE Pro at the time that I'm recording this. I do really encourage people to use the Pro version if they can swing it. If you don't have access to the Pro version, everything we're going to do works in the community version. Just bear in mind that if I'm doing things like adding links while nodes are on, that's something the Pro version supports. That's something the community version does not. I don't think I have any packet captures in this video series, but there's some upside, and particularly for somebody like me, the Pro version is sort of essential, but not required. This is just what I'm using. I'm using a pre-release of the Apstra 4.2.1 software. It should be out any day now. The reason I didn't use 4.2.0 is that there are some significant UI changes between 4.2.0 and 4.2.1. I wanted to make sure that this video series is durable, and I didn't want the UI to immediately deprecate and look completely different than the new UI. And when I say completely different, it's not, I mean, you could find your way around, right? It's not like it's crazy, but this menu's different now, and some of the prompts look a little different, and I wanted it to be more durable because I put a lot of time. I mean, 272 slides. I don't want to have to redo this for a while. I'm using vJunos, or sometimes it's referred to as VEX. You can use the current version. I'm just including for reference the versions of this code that I'm using. This is the version of VSRX I'm using, VMX. Just get the current version. If you have issues, downgrade, go to the community, ask, see if anybody else has experienced it. These are the versions I have in my lab, and they seem to be working fine. You have a lot more flexibility with how you want to build your testing hosts. I'm using UMate. Whatever, just you need something you can log into and ping from. I used UMate because I wanted the UI, because I also wanted to demonstrate that I could get out to the public internet and browse the web from a node connected behind the fabric in my lab, which I thought was pretty slick. Let's get into some of the README type stuff. I'm using a bare metal instance of EVE. Since this is all vJunos, I could use a EVE running on a virtual platform. Even EVE recommends you do bare metal, but I understand that's not practical for everybody. If you want to use vEvo, which is the Evo version of Junos code that we have on some of our Jericho platforms and our next generation switching and our PTX platforms, you're going to need to have Eve on bare metal. It's absolute requirement because of the way the image nesting works in vEvo. You have to run it on bare metal. And that's actually not even an Eve thing. If you're using a virtual platform and this is a guest operating system on a virtual host, you're going to have problems too. I'm going to assume that you've already downloaded all the software that you need. That's going to be a copy of Apstra, a copy of the vJunos image. There's instructions for how to deploy the vJunos image onto Eve and build the YAML file for it that's required. That's information that Juniper put together. I'll have links to that in the thread for this video that I'll obviously link in the description here. You do need to make sure you have sufficient resources. I'll show you what my build looks like and what the resources that are being used are with this lab fully running, which is one of the reasons I haven't torn it down yet. And it's not strictly required, but you should have some way to reach, just for the sake of your own sanity, reach the out-of-band network that connects in here. In my case, it's called LabNet 10. I'll explain that in a second, but you're going to be accessing Apstra through a HTTPS page. If you can connect to the network that is your out-of-band network in your lab with the computer you're working from and open up a web browser and go to Apstra like I've done here on the screen, then you're going to be in much better shape. So just keep that in mind as you design not just your lab, but the relationship your Eve server has with the rest of your network. We're going to go through a couple topology screenshots. The topology screenshots are your instructions for building your lab. What you see on the screen, I'm not going to step-by-step this. It's just too much work. The documentation that I'm going to provide has a logical diagram that is just really, really high level. It's got this detail, and then it's got even zoomed in detail for the different fabrics, and then the DCI/WAN and the testing hosts. Like I said, you're going to be responsible for this. If you're running Eve, I'm going to give you a file that you can just import. It'll import the lab and it'll maintain the links and all this text. You will still have to go in and right click each of these. I can't do it here because it's running, but then you'll have to go in and you'll have to select the operating system you're using. You have to select vJunos and the version and then deploy that. But everything else will be intact. It should save you a ton of time. You'll note that the management interfaces here are color-coded. I did that because when Eve builds links, it builds them all in this blue color, and this, if you leave them blue, gets real busy real quick. So I spent some time, this is actually on the first series I did, figuring out what at least I felt was the best combination of settings for those links to sort of make them blend into the background. I use a dashed style. I do a link style of state machine, which allows them to be a bit curvy. The link color is really where the magic happens. The hex code is FFCCCC. I did the same for these firewalls, which are out of scope of this series. I was going to actually include building that service chain. On the Apstra side, it's fairly straightforward. The configurations for a firewall, either a cluster or what we would deploy, which is multi-node HA, which is really slick, again, out of scope here. Particularly with the type 5 route support, it's really neat, and I want to make sure people comprehend configurations. They don't just copy paste. I want to spend time on it, and it would have, this would have just gotten bananas. Also, I'm switching roles, so it would have pushed the amount of time it took to build this lab well into when that change happens. That change is onto a security team, so I figured I would shelve the thing that I could justify continued work on until later. These are here, they're in red, so they stand out, and if you know my videos, you know that when I color code links that have data next to them, I color code the data as well, so it's easy to see. Let's get into some issues and caveats. First, as I mentioned, if you want to run vEvo, you have to be on a bare metal deployment of EVE-NG. If you encounter links that aren't passing traffic, and Lord knows it'll happen every once in a while, it is never a node thing, unless you're out of memory. It is a Eve thing. And when I say it's an Eve thing, it means you need to do something with Eve to resolve the issue. That something with Eve is going to require some work on the nodes, but the issues don't persist after you do this work. So the very first thing you do is you shut the node off, and then you run the fix permissions command on Eve. If you've run Eve before, you know what that is. If not, it's in the instructions. I won't get into it, but it is sort of as cleanup. Boot that node back up. 9 times out of 10, maybe even a better average than that, everything's fine. I will say that I've had much better success booting nodes up and then building the links versus building a lab with everything turned off and then adding links and then turning everything on. It seems like the links are much less grumpy when the nodes that they are connecting are already powered up. There might be some cases where turning the node off and running fixed permissions doesn't work. In that case, you might have to turn the node off, delete the link, run fixed permissions, boot it up, add the link back in, and then twice, maybe 3 times in the whole time that I've been using Eve for labs, I've had to just bounce the Eve server. But there's never been a situation where I haven't been able to recover. My build, I am using a HP DL 380 Gen 9. These are my specs. Obviously a lot of cores, a heck of a lot of RAM. That's the thing you really need to be sensitive to. Shout out to my friend Alexander Germain at Elastaflow for literally giving me most of this server. Swell dude. He's like, I have so many computers in my garage. How many times does somebody say, oh no, you can just have it? And then of course, you don't. This guy, it was days and I had it. It was amazing. I am running the lab fully built, and I even have these firewalls on, which you can leave out of yours if you want to. Here is what my utilization looks like right now. So just keep this in mind. You can see that it does use quite a bit of memory. If you want to adjust the instructions and just build one fabric due to resource limitations, that's fine. You can get creative. Just be aware that you are going to need a decent amount of memory to operate this many nodes in a single lab. And this is the only lab that I have running, so there's nothing else that's causing a drain on that. I already talked about the out of band, but it's worth mentioning again because here it is on my slide deck. This here is the connectivity to my out of band that I have to the computer that I'm on right now. It's just super helpful if you do that. You can name it anything you want. I just LabNet 10's the language that I use on the firewall that sits at the edge of my lab network. If you do start to run out of memory in Eve, the most common issue you're going to have is your ability to connect via SSH is going to be impacted. You might see sessions drop. You might see them freeze. You might not be able to access via SSH. If you run into something like that, go check your memory utilization. Just go to this button here and hit status and see if you're getting close. When I say close, if you're up above 85, 90%, you're close. And that can cause all sorts of weird problems that will make you pull your hair out. These bridge nodes, I have this under issues and not caveats because this is an issue for me. And I'll go back to my normal camera. Even though this is what got me in trouble before and caused me to have to re-record, I absolutely hate building lag interfaces, specifically LACP, with Linux. If you can make it work and you can do it consistently, you're a legend, all right? I won't deal with it. It's maddening. So I deployed some SRXs in packet mode and I configured them to be these LACP termination points for ESI lag from the fabric. And then I connected these single-legged UMate hosts. And I'll take you through all the configuration that I put on these firewalls to make them not really firewalls anymore to act in this role. So you won't have to worry about trying to figure that out yourself if it's not a workflow that you're familiar with. You'll note that I have MAC addresses here. The reason I did that is because since I'm running a DHCP server, I wanted to know what the MACs were to make this somewhat deterministic. I didn't actually bother with any of the other stuff up here, but for these fabric devices, I did because they're getting DHCP addresses through reservations off the management network here. That sits outside, and we'll get to a second why I'm not using ZTP. If you remember the old series, there was also a SID value. That was required when using VQFX, and it was a pain in the butt. That pain in the butt no longer exists because we're not using VQFX, so yay for that. Now we're going to get into some of the things that I got to learn while I was building this lab for the first time. Every time I dumped this lab and rebuilt it, 1 or 2 of these would come up and I'd see an anomaly after onboarding that complained about sustained CPU. It looked like this. It's in the instructions, so I'll actually give you an example of what that is. There was a DHCP process that was hogging CPU in every single case. And the way that you would diagnose that, I'll take you through it here. Just put it into the Mind Palace and then come back to it if you need to. I'm waiting for secure CRT to boot here. Get into the node that is suspect, verify the problem by doing show chassis hardware. First thing you'll be, oh, not that, geez. Show chassis routing engine. You're looking for this value. If it's being overrun, this will be north of 1.0. And then you'll do show system processes extensive, which essentially just runs a top command here. And if you're having the problem that I encountered, at the very top of this will be DHCP process that's running pretty hot. Note the PID, process ID, and then run request system process terminate, put that PID in, it'll dump the DHCP process, and then it will restart it. The problem will never come back, I promise. That's the end of it. You will never have to deal with it again. If you did, well, we'd be doing things differently, but you don't. It just goes away. So that's it. Now, the most important bit of advice that I'm likely to give you during this video is to turn off the UKSM memory management. It has to be off. Get here by going to System, System Status, and turn this off. I'm just trying to draw a line through it. That's not an arrow. This has to be off. There was one scenario where I tried to turn this off and it wouldn't let me turn it off, and I rebooted the EVE server and I could turn it off. I think that was an anomaly. I don't think that's going to be your experience. The reason I'm mentioning it is that it's so important to turn this off that if you run into roadblocks and you have to like shut down all your labs and you have to reboot your EVE server just to turn UKSM off, do it. Like, don't even hesitate. Don't even think twice. Do it. It will. The types of problems that it creates if you leave it on are maddening. All right, moving on to ZTP, or why I'm not using it. Well, the fact of the matter is ZTP really doesn't work with the virtual nodes. If you want to simulate ZTP, for now, trust me that it works. The scenarios where you would use ZTP are incongruent with a virtual lab that we're using. So I don't use ZTP. For these virtual nodes, we give them IP addresses either manually or we do it over DHCP. And then there's a little bit of prep that we need to do to get them prepared for onboarding. And I'll take you through that in just a minute. The first thing I need to do as we get to this prepping switches part is I need to nuke my lab. I'm not gonna make you sit through that. I'm just gonna pause the video.
A few moments later.
You know, it dawns on me that there's no reason to keep you from all the enjoyment of actually blowing things to pieces. So I'm gonna you can watch, that's fine. We'll highlight these and we'll say stop. I'll highlight this. I'll click out and I'll right click it and hit stop. And then I'll click out, I'll do this. I would never recommend turning more than one or two of these on at a time. For whatever reason, EVE gets a little grumpy if you try to power up too many nodes at the same time. That's been my experience. It's anecdotal, but the headaches that are created when links aren't passing traffic mean that I'm much happier just not taking chances. Come on, turn off. Now right click, stop selected. Over here, right click, stop selected. Have you decided not to, are we not doing that now? Oh, it's going, okay. You, turn you off. You, turn you off. Now what I'm not going to turn off is this WAN sim. I'll walk through what that configuration is, but since it's out of scope of the, no, not out of scope, it's not, I'm not gonna, how you connect into it, your core network, if you want to get connectivity to the internet, it's gonna be so specific to your own environment that I don't think there's much point in showing you more than just the basic configuration elements that go on that box, like NAT. So I'm gonna leave that on because I don't plan to wipe it. I'll turn these off as well. Stop. And these, because these are, we're gonna configure all these as well. I'll take you through it. And okay, so they're done. Now I'll draw a big square. I'll make this topology a little bit smaller. Big square. Oh, no, don't highlight the WAN sim, please. You know, some things they highlight by just touching. Some things have to be fully in the box. This is definitely a just touching platform. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say wipe, and that is going to wipe all of these boxes. Done. That's it. Now, just for the sake of sanity, I am going to open up Secure CRT. And I'm going to run the fix permissions command. It is not a bad idea to be in the habit of doing this with EVE periodically. Oh, no. EVE. There. Oh, no, I logged into my switch. All right. I wrote a script. It looks like this. That's the command you would run to fix permissions. I just don't like remembering it, so I created a little script. Do .fix.sh. When all the nodes are off, usually this runs a lot faster than when they're all on. anyway, that can keep going while I power stuff up. Like I said, the first things that we're going to power up are just these. And then as we move through the video series, we'll be bringing other things online. First things first, let's bring up our EOS server. We need to boot it, and we need to give it initial configuration. Now this, I'm not going to make you sit through. I'll show you the configuration. I'm not going to make you sit through actually booting it up and booting everything else up. I'm going to pause now, and when I come back, all of this will be fully booted. And I'll take you through the initial setup, and that'll be the end of the video. So be right back. All right, we are back. Everything's on, and full disclosure, the way that I did this is I brought up a stopwatch app and I turn on one node every minute. Like I mentioned before, I've had challenges if I try to bring up too many nodes at the same time. You can get grumpy, links can be weird. It might not be your experience, but it's been mine. So that's the way I do it. We'll start by going into EOS. This is all pretty straightforward. And this is like the one time that we're going to be in the UI. Admin. I have to change the password. Now, this will be in documentation. There are considerations for the password. And I'll just write it here on the screen so you got it. I used 14 characters as my password. You'll never guess why. Let me bring this back over here. 14 characters, exclamation points. Oh, turns out I do have to put in the original password first. I'm a goof. All right, 14 characters. There we go, and 14. You know I don't edit this stuff out. What? Oh yes, well, it is complex. 14 characters and 14CHARAT. Oh, you're killing me. Oh, finally. Geez, sorry to make you sit through that. You know I don't edit this stuff out though. Look. Engineers are just like you and me. So I'm going to change the password for the UI. This is fun. This one's 9 characters, or 9 letters is what I use for this. 9, the word letters with a capital L and an exclamation point at the end. 9, capital L, letters, exclamation point, 9 letters, exclamation point. Hey, got it right on the first try. Great. Did the local credentials, did the UI credentials, going into the network settings, it's already set for DHCP, that should be fine. So really, we shouldn't have to do anything else. The service here should already be running. The way that I'm gonna verify this is I'm just gonna go open up the UI. I'm using the same IP address. I already have the password loaded. I'll click login. You'll see I don't have my blueprints here. My fabrics are gone because I wiped that node. Apstra is now ready, and I can just click cancel here and it drops back. If you ever need to get back into that, I think it's EOS_config. Yep, that'll take you back in. Great, so I can close that. And I'm going to take you through the instructions on how to do one of these for prep one of these. It's the same process for all of them, and it's in the documentation. Even though we're not using vEvo, there are some workflows that I'm going to include for vEvo if you decide to use it. We're going to be using this workflow here. I don't think I can get this on the page with my terminal at the same time, so I'm going to move this off. Again, this will be documentation you can download. Links in the description. I'll open up one of these, and I'm going to do this one. Since I'm using Secure CRT, you could literally open all of these, and then in Secure CRT, you can right-click this box at the bottom, tell it to send characters immediately, and then send commands to all sessions and run these all at the same time. I will do that for all of the other nodes, but for this one, I'll log in with root. There is no password. I type CLI to get here. I type configuration exclusive. And the reason that I do that is that there are some ZTP functions embedded into vJunos. There's a lot in vEvo, and it can sometimes lock the configuration. So if I am in the configuration and I use exclusive, it will prevent any of these automated processes from interfering with the work that I'm doing. Now, what it won't do is prevent these annoying DHCP messages from popping up. You're just gonna have to deal with that until you do your first commit. So first things first, Somewhat dramatic, but we delete the entire config. See, show it's not there. Great. I'm going to set a root authentication password. It's required to commit any configuration. We're going to have a plain text password. In this case, we're using capital J Juniper for everything. So capital J UNIPR. Type it again. Hey, looks like I've remembered how to type passwords correctly. Now we're going to create a service account for Apstra. You can use whatever you want. In my documentation, I use at AOS admin. So login user AOS admin class super-user authentication plain text password. Certainly once you get these things done and the password gets encrypted, you can just copy and paste that into another device. This is also Juniper with a capital J. I'm just typing it out for your information. Set interfaces FXP 0.0 family inet DHCP. That turns on DHCP on the management interface. I need to make sure that the interface is in the management routing instance. That instance is a default instance, but it is not active until you put in this command. Now it is active. However, it also needs to show up as a VERF. If I do a show routing instances, you'll see there's nothing there. Now I assure you the management instance is working, but we actually have to have it show up as a routing instance for Apstra not to get grumpy. The way that we do that is by creating the absolute most benign configuration you can think of. We go into the routing instance, we use mgmt_junos, which is the name of that hidden routing instance. This kind of unhides it. And we type in a description and we call it mgmt_junos. That creates just enough config right here for that to work in Apstra not to complain. Set system services netconf SSH. And now we're going to set system commit synchronize. And we're going to say commit and quit. Now, the reason we do that commit synchronize is that the vJunos image is built on a EX9200, I think 9214 technically speaking, architecture, which means it thinks there might be a second routing engine. It's completely trivial, but it is required. Now I should be able to onboard this. We'll do that in the next video. What I'm going to do, what you need to do is wash, rinse, repeat that exact same set of commands for the rest of these nodes. And I will see you in the next video. As always, thanks for watching. Link to the discussions in the description. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.